of our Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our second session of this training. This one is on navigating HL7 processes for workgroup co-chairs. I see a lot of faces that old faces and new faces that I recognize, and some of you some names I don't recognize. So welcome. My name is John Duteau. I'm an HL7 fellow. I'm also the TSC chair. This is in my second year of my term. I'm a co-chair of pharmacy work group, co-chair of the BR&R work group, and a co-chair of the cross group projects work group. I'm on the board, and I do a whole bunch of things. So, some of us are type A personalities, and when you get involved in an organization, you just got to really get involved. And I'm one of those. And so that's why I'm taking over for Melvin Peters, who used to teach this little course, to talk about the HL7 organization and how to help co-chairs navigate both the organization and the processes. So in our agenda, I'm going to talk about the HL7 organizational structure. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. Information sources about HL7 and its processes. And if you have any questions at any point in time, I suspect once we get into the information sources, please ask. I may defer some of those questions because as part of the TSC, we're trying to work really hard at streamline, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we get to that. I'll get into co-chair responsibilities and processes around management of work groups and project management. We'll look at some of the HL7 tooling and then some general Q&A at the end. So here's the HL7 organizational chart, right? So we have the HL7 board of directors at the top, and then to the left-hand side is basically what's called the C-suite. So this one's a little bit out of date in this last year, but we've got our CEO, Chuck Jaffe. We've got our Chief Standards Development Officer, Dan Vreeman, our Chief Standards Implementation Chief, the Implementation Officer, Viet, and then the Deputy, Diego. We did used to have Mark McDougall as a COO. We've brought the AMG people, for those of you who know, that's all of our HL7 staff that we refer to. We brought them in as actual HL7 staff. So now Karen Van Hendrick is the executive director and is sort of taking that role of COO. Off the HL7 board of directors, we do have some executive committees. We're the board of director officers. So there's a finance committee, there's other various committees that are there. And then on the right-hand side, that gets into way more of the HL7 that all of us here as co-chairs and people involved in developing the standards would see. So there's the technical steering committee, the TSC. I currently chair that, and we've got a number of people that are on that one. There's an advisory council to the board of directors, and then there's the international council. And there's two representatives from the international council that sit on the board of directors. And the international council is made up of all the HL7 affiliates and brings that international perspective to HL7. Sitting underneath the TSC is the work groups. So that's all of us who are co-chairs or who participate in the work groups. They all fall underneath the TSC. There's also the U.S. Realms Steering Committee for handling U.S. Realms specific issues because there isn't a U.S. affiliate. So that's where we sort of get some of those issues get handled. There's the HL7 Terminology Authority. So for handling external and larger terminology issues. And then there's the product and services management groups. And again, this slide, I do need to fix this. The HTA is really now we've made a terminology service management group, and HTA is part of that group. So that's one of the things. I didn't look at this org chart when I just assumed it was correct, and my apologies, it's a year out of date. So for what affects us from the org perspective, obviously the board of directors, they set sort of the strategy of the organization. The TSC, we're sort of down in creating the tactics of how do we get our standards, governing the processes, and then the work groups are we're the ones doing the work, and we're assisted by those other committees. Here's a list of all of the work groups. These come, they're fairly, they don't come and go, but there are changes that happen. I think we have SOA in here. They're changing their name to OSA to be less of a focus on services and more on orchestration, and that happens with some of our groups. We get some new groups that come along and some older groups disappear, right? So at any point in time, this list is a little bit out of date, but there is on the website, if you go to the hl7.org, there is a drop down in the menu of work groups, and that allows you to see excuse me, all of the different work groups that exist. There's a number of board or TSC appointed groups. So we have the product on the right-hand side there, the product and services management groups. Those fall under the TSC. So CDA management group, fire management group, V2 management group, and terminology services management group. So our major products that we have, they each get a management group. If there is a product that isn't V2 fire or CDA, the TSC is in charge of that product from a management perspective. On the left-hand side, we talked about the International Council. There's also the Education and Advisory Council. There's the Leadership Development and Nomination Committee. These are all board committees. The Governance Operations Committee, the GOC, works on all of our, not our bylaws, but the actual rules for how we conduct ourselves in terms of creating our specifications. And then there's the Policy Advisory Committee, the PAC, which looks at outside external governments. It's very US focused at this point, but they're broadening themselves, and we're getting some of the international policy and international government things that are going on that the PAC watches and lets us know. So as co-chairs and as members, you may have seen some of the emails that the PAC sends out. So again, what affects us, in terms of being co-chairs and the work we do in developing standards is mainly the TSC. So that's where the work groups fall under. So it's good for us to understand the mission and charter of the TSC. So it provides technical leadership to the HL7 organization. Basically, we ensure that the efforts of the working group are focused on the overall mission. We provide input to the board of directors, right? So here's what we're hearing from the membership at large. Here's our standards. Here's where we need to focus on. So we provide that up to the board of directors. I sit as the TSC chair on the board, and vice versa. Any board strategies that impact the working group flow down and come through the TSC. When we're talking about that governance and operations committee, the GOC, the TSC works closely with them to ensure that how the oversight of our activities towards the development of standards that gets into. We have two documents, the GOM, Governance and Operations Manual, and the HL7 Essential Requirements. Those two documents together indicate how we are to the external world. You can read those, and that's how we are going to govern ourselves, and how it governs how we ballot things, how we name things, the structure of HL7 in terms of the TSC and the work groups, how co-chairs can get in and get out, and all those kinds of things. So it's very useful. So you want to search for the GOM, Governance and Operations Manual, and the HL7 Essential Requirements. Those are both, you'll find them on the website, hl7.org, under references. Here's our charter, a whole bunch of bullet points that I'm not going to read out to you. Basically, again, we develop and maintain the processes to develop our standards. That's, governance of them, management of them, the terminology, all those kinds of things, right? So it's a very, very focused management function, although there's a lot of methodology questions that get raised to the TSC. And at the end of the day, we're sort of the last step. If there's no one can decide on something, it gets pushed all the way up to the TSC. And again, the composition and this mission and charter is in the GOM. So again, reading the GOM to understand exactly what the TSC does and how it works is very useful. Here's the composition. We have a TSC chair and vice chair. So we used to just have a chair, and we follow the way the HL7 board does. So you have a TSC chair who serves for 2 years, and then we have a vice chair who comes on and serves the first year as the incoming chair. So right now I'm the TSC chair, and Rick Geimer is my incoming chair. And then next year I'll become vice chair by being the past chair, and Rick will stay on and take over as the TSC chair. So we always have 2 chairs at that. The Chief Standards Development Officer down in purple, right? That's Dan Vreeman. So he plus the chair and vice chair are considered the TSC executive. The 3 of us work together to ensure that the TSC meetings and what we need to present to the board and such works together. We have right now 3 affiliate/realm representatives, so we can have up to 6, but we currently have 3. We have a U.S. realm steering committee member, and we have 2 international representatives serving on the TSC. We have 4 product management group reps, so 1 for each of the product management groups, so CDA, V2, fire, and terminology. We have working group representatives, so 5 working group representatives. If anyone remembers, if some of the old people would remember the steering divisions, these sort of take the place of the steering division. So these 5 working group representatives are intended for you as co-chairs to talk to if you have issues to bring up to the TSC, but also if it flows down. If we have, we need to talk to the pharmacy work group, we'll find the working group representative, and that person will talk to the pharmacy work group around whatever it is they need to talk to. 2 implementer representatives. These are people who have been widely known as implementers of HL7 standards, and they bring that implementer perspective to the TSC, so it's really helpful. The board chair is ex officio on the TSC, and then any ad hoc members. We have 2 ad hoc members currently right now. Dave Pike is our GOC representative, so he helps us with those changes to the GOM and the essential requirements. And Austin Chrysler, who was the TSC chair before me and had been TSC chair for quite a while, we've kept him on. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's retiring. He said this morning on a call, since he's a programmer, his retirement is actually called garbage collection. So if you're a programmer, you'll kind of understand that. But he's got such a wealth of history of why things are that we kept him on the TSC, and we'll keep him on the TSC until he leaves and sails off into the sunset. Any questions around the TSC composition? Again, on the website, and let me break out to the website and we'll do that, and I'll show you. I've been talking about it. So if you go to the HL7 website, so under resources, so the menu at the top, there's work groups that'll get you the whole list of all of the work groups. There's procedures and templates, so that's where you'll find the GOM and the essential requirements. So here's the essential requirements, and here's the governance and operations manual. And there's a cycle of which the GOM itself gets updated. Essential requirements, not so much. We work with ANSI. So for those of you who know, we're an ANSI accredited organization, and how our standards fit in with ANSI's rules, that's what the essential requirements is about. So that doesn't change that often, but the governance and operation manual does change it gets updated on a quarterly basis or trimester basis, three times a year, whatever that ends up being. If you go to work groups and then you go to the TSC, we're listed in here, technical steering committee, and then there's leadership, and we have the list of all the different people. So that's if you get into it from the website, right? If you go to Confluence, which is where many of us spend most of our time, right? The Confluence page. So the GOM and the essential requirements, those are found on the HL7's website, but on the Confluence, we do have a listing of all the work groups here, as well as a link to get straight to the technical steering committee. Here's where the product and service management groups are. Here's some of the board of director committees, right? Accelerators, which I don't talk to too much here. We also have a list, right? And then the affiliates who have Confluence pages, right? So this front page of the Confluence will allow you, I go here quite often. I don't mainly have links, but then if you click on technical steering committee, right, again, down here, you'll see the list of all of the members. And if you're interested in finding out which work groups belong to which of the work group representatives, there's also a page here, TSC composition, distribution of work groups amongst TSC work group reps, that show you who would be talking to. So it'd be Brian Peck who would be talking to pharmacy. If the TSC had some issue we needed to bring up with pharmacy, Brian Peck would be the one who'd be showing up. Again, if you're from this work group and one of these work groups, and that's who you want to talk to as your work group rep, you've got something to bring to the TSC, you can certainly do that. You can talk to any of these work group reps, or if anyone you happen to know in the TSC. It's not a formal relationship where only these work groups can talk to these people, but it just allows us to make it easy for us to communicate. So again, that's in the technical steering committee space, which you can get to from the Confluence front page. All right, let me go back to the presentation. Here are the current members. So as I said, myself as the chair, Rick Geimer as the chair-elect, Dan Vreeman is the CSDO. Our international reps, Chris Sean represents the US realm, Alexander Zutke and Christoph Gessner are the international reps. The working group reps, Gora, Ricky, Brian, Juliet, and Lloyd, and a couple of them are on. Our management group reps from the fire management group, Gino, from V2, Amit, CDA, Linda, and TSMG, Rob McClure. Our implementer reps are James Agnew, and Jeff Brown. Like I mentioned earlier, Dave Pike's our GOC liaison, and Austin Chrysler. I wanted to put a fancy title here, like Keeper of the Knowledge, or something like that, but I didn't have enough room. And then, yes, our working group representatives, and like I said, I showed you on the Confluence page, but here it is in the slide deck to see which work groups belong to which work group representatives. So where can you find information, right? So I've explained the TSC and the TSC, how, the organization of the TSC, and the work groups fit into that, right? Everything you do will flow up to the TSC for approval, and conversations and questions and requests can eventually make their way to the TSC, and it might also flow down. So where can you find some of that information? Excuse me. And so we've got a bunch of links here that show, so the HL7 Essentials, and we're going to talk to that, the Co-Chair Handbook, the HL7 website, workgroup websites, and so on and so forth. And we talked about the GOM and the essential requirements already, right? And that's one of the things that I'm probably going to do is really give you more of, talk to you a lot about the essentials page and on the Confluence page about how to find things. And this is where, it comes with a caveat, and it comes from the TSC as TSC chair. We recognize, and especially when I go to this essentials page, there's a lot of stuff in here, and we're not sure that all of it is now essential. It got added in as being believed essential, but now we've got a large list. And unfortunately, that's caused some of it to get out of date. We've been remiss at ensuring that that we're keeping up all of the pages up to date. And so there is an initiative at the TSC, and Anne, our HL7 staff representative, a lot of you know Anne Wizauer, she's working really hard at going through the pages to make sure that they're up to date. And I know individual management groups are also doing that as well. I'm just looking at the questions. Mark asked, do accelerators feed into TSC through the work groups? Yes, exactly right. Accelerators sit outside of the HL7 structure per se, so they weren't in that sort of org chart. And the way that we would liaise with accelerators is through projects that they bring into HL7, and those projects would come in through the work group. All right, so let me first talk about the HL7 Essentials. So on the website, on the Confluence website, we've got this big red box, and this is the HL7 Essentials. All right, so if you come to Confluence, and then you can go click on this to the HL7 Essentials page, and the intent is to provide all, the essential information, and a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in this, and will talk about in this presentation is found here in the essentials space. The problem, like I said, is that there's a lot of stuff here, so it's even hard to figure out what is it that you want to see. And even as a member, a long-term member of the HL7, and knowing that I found that page in essentials, you give me a month and I can't remember where I found it. I'm like, I know that's in the essentials somewhere, I just can't remember where. So we're working very hard at the TSC, both to make sure that any pages we've got here are up to date, and also to try and give a different flow to the essentials. So we might have, hey, we do have, new projects, work group management, but almost like the fire specification has, where, hey, are you new to HL7? Well, then here's 5 things you should know. And then here's some other stuff that links to other things that you're going to need to know eventually. Are you new to co-chairing? Okay, here's 3 things you need to, something like that. Those kinds of things to make, because here it's a lot of stuff, and where do I want to go for where I want to go. But having said that, there, a lot of the links that we have here are useful, right? So if you want to find out about connect-a-thons, or in the fire management group, right? And a lot of stuff around HL7 fire. If you want to find, we'll talk about the Co-Chair Handbook. Here it is right here. Some of those links that we gave you on the working group representatives, right, are there. Meeting room requests, we're going to talk about that as co-chairs. What do we need to do, right? We've got a lot of links here. Again, the problem is there's some duplication, and there's also, I click on something and I click on, and boom, I get to where it was, and I'm like, okay, I remember that being in the essentials, but I don't remember what it was titled, right? So again, there's a caveat that there's a lot of good information here, but you can get lost in it. And we are trying to, as I said, the TSC is trying very hard to try and streamline this to make it easy for people to get to the information they need to get to. As co-chairs, one of the big things is the co-chair handbook. This used to be an actual document you could get, and it's now been turned into web pages. And this has got a great, there's a lot of information in here. And again, a lot of it's echoed in the HL7 Essentials. So I encourage everyone who's even if you're an old co-chair, if you've never looked at the co-chair handbook, to please do so. And if you're a new co-chair or thinking of becoming a co-chair, right, this is a great handbook to get into. So we've got introduction, some of the stuff we did already, introduction, the organization and the TSC. And then there's some things, again, that we're going to be talking about later on. Your role as a co-chair, how to use some of the tools that we've got, work group planning, project management, balloting, right? So a lot of the things that are in my presentation, you're going to see here in the co-chair handbook, right? So again, if you've got you can drop a link. We've got a link in the presentation, but it's, one of the top things right in the work group management co-chair handbook. All right, let me go back to the presentation. Yeah, so here we talked about the co-chair handbook. If you do find any information that's out of date, incorrect, or unclear, you can do two things. You can grumble about it and complain that we don't know what we're doing. I do that all the time. The second thing, please, is click on the submit changes to this page, both of the HL7 Essential space, HL7 Essential space, and on the co-chair handbook, there's a button to allow you to suggest submit changes. That comes to us, and then we can see that. Again, the TSC, we're undergoing, we're already looking at a review of the HL7 Essentials pages, but the more the eyes, the better, the more hands, the merrier. And so, finding stuff that's bothersome or that is incorrect or still unclear, please let us know by doing this, submit the changes. All right, so we've shown you where some of that information is. What are the co-chair responsibilities, right? So there's basically 3 items that falls under the co-chair responsibility, and it's around the effective, it's all towards effective use of the work group. So your work group has a mission and charter, it's got a focus within HL7, and you as a co-chair of that work group want to in these 3 areas, make sure your work group is effectively using its resources. So the administration items of the work group based on the decision-making practices, right? So making sure that meetings are in the conference call center, that people know when they are. So Confluence is where a lot of, most of us, almost all of us, use for announcing where our meetings are. Posting agendas and minutes. And again, Confluence again is the source for that for so many of us. So making sure that people can see when your work group's meeting, what, is it on a regular cadence? Is it ad hoc? Whatever it is, but those meetings are announced and they know how to get there, and they can see what the agendas are and they can see the minutes, both for your conference calls that occur throughout the year and also when we're at our working group meetings, to make sure that people know, hey, we are meeting at the work group meeting, coming in Dallas, and here's our agenda. And then after the fact, here's the minutes, right? We get audited by ANSI, because as an ANSI accredited organization, and one of the big things is around agendas and minutes and announcing of meetings, because we need to be clear so that people can, if they want to come and find out what's going on, or if they have opinions that they want to offer, they have to know when we're meeting. So that's one of the big things. A second thing is effectively managing projects. Everything that happens in HL7 is done via a project, all of the work that's done. And in managing those projects, the projects have a life cycle, right? So again, the co-chairs are in charge of ensuring that those projects are managed effectively. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to be involved in every project, but you need to make sure that the projects have got good leadership and that they're following the processes that both HL7 and potentially your work group puts forward. And then finally, the ballot development reconciliation process, which kind of goes with projects, but is specific to specifications that are created by those projects, effectively managing that. So understanding what's involved in getting something to ballot and how you reconcile all the comments and how you eventually get that published. So those 3 things are really the co-chair responsibilities. You don't necessarily have to do all of them by yourself. A lot of our groups have lots of co-chairs, so more hands make less work. I think that's the phrase, but it doesn't necessarily need to be co-chairs that are doing all of these things. As I mentioned with projects, project leads, you can hopefully rely on them and set some standards for them. For creating agendas and minutes or taking minutes, it doesn't necessarily have to be a co-chair, things like that, right? So a lot of this, as long as you know of a co-chair that you're in charge, you're on the hook for this, but you can get as many people involved to help you with these things. And again, that's why we have multiple co-chairs for most work groups, is to make it easier to do all this work. So administrative duties, announcing meetings, right? Confluence is the place where we do that. We used to have a wiki, we used to email, and we've moved on, and so Confluence is the place. So having in your work group space, having a spot where people can find out when you meet and how often you meet, right, is very useful. Agendas for your conference calls and your working group meetings should be posted to Confluence, as well as the minutes. Many of us combine those into one, where we have an agenda and we add the minutes to, on the same page. That works, whatever works for your work group, but those need to be visible so people know when you're meeting, what you're going to be talking about, and then what did you talk about. There will be questions on the work group, your listserv, and some work groups will have specific streams on Zulip. Zulip is the chat application that we use, right, of choice. And so again, as co-chairs, to make sure that the questions are being responded to. Do you have to be the one doing it? No, but you have to make sure that those questions are getting responded to, either in the chat, or you invite people to come to a meeting where you can talk about it. The TSC member webinars that we have, and we're having one on the 30th, so in a couple days, they're held semi-regularly via Zoom, so check the mailing list. These used to be co-chair webinars where we would provide information, the TSC would provide information to the co-chairs, but we really recognized that a lot of the information we were providing was useful to members at large, and so they're now TSC member webinars. Submitting room requests for the next working group meeting. That's always a necessary thing, right? So between your co-chairs in your work group, you need to make sure that the room request, so it's due 2 weeks after the end of the work group meeting. So after January's working group meeting, it was due 2 weeks for the next one, right? And there's a meeting request form and an email, and Mary Ann sends us out. And basically, it's to make sure we're planning for that next working group meeting where everyone gets together in case that they're in person and we get the right rooms and we don't pay for too much. Where there is a work group health, and many of you know about this, and you get gold stars, and it's amazing what a little tiny gold star can do. It caused so many of us to start, actually looking at the processes. So there are a bunch of metrics that we track and report on. They're announced quarterly at the work group meeting or on a co-chair webinar. And like I said, the healthiest work groups get gold stars, right? And again, you'd think, for all of us in our daily lives, we, where some of us are executives, some of us do all sorts of different work, and yet the introduction of the gold star to HL7 really helped all of us improve our processes and follow the processes and make sure things are going on. So it's pretty neat. On the right hand side, I list some of the metrics that we track. Do you have projects? If you don't have any projects, what's your work group doing? Have you updated your mission charter? Are you following the deadlines? Are you balloting things? What we just talked about. Are you publishing your minutes? Do you have your conference calls scheduled? Those kinds of things. All of those administrative tasks go into the work group health, and just let you as a co-chair, and it's really to help you as a co-chair, us as a co-chair, know what it is I need to do, right? Like when I get that spreadsheet of the projects and the project health, oh, hey, I didn't realize I missed that there's a deadline coming up in 3 months that we need to work on. Cool. I kind of knew it, but I forgot, or it was, I remember that from a year ago, and we said, oh, that's a year from now. I could wait for that. And whoa, shoot, the time is upon us. So a lot of these things are meant to help us understand and keep on top and make sure our work groups are performing to the way we can. So that's the administrative side, and we've got work group health to help with that. Then from the processes side, as a co-chair, there's 2 things to be aware of: projects and balloting. And those tend to be tightly wound together, but they don't have to. A project, like I said, is how any piece of work within HL7 is done. That's how it's recognized. So what's your work group doing we look at, when the TSC asks or when anyone asks, they go and look at your projects. What are the projects that you're involved in, right? So there may be things that you're doing that aren't associated with the project. That should be few and far between, right? Because anything can be raised as a project. Again, it's just the visibility of what's this work group doing. I can go look at the projects. Okay, those are projects that I'm interested in. And so the work group and ultimately us as co-chairs, we're responsible for ensuring that our projects meet the process requirements. That means if a project, even though you may not be involved in it, if there's issues with deadlines or appeals or whatever, it's the work group that gets dinged. Vice versa, if a project who wants to work with a work group, they may not be able to proceed if that work group has issues. And we don't have too many of that. Over the last 3 or 4 years, there's only been 1 or 2 work groups that have had some trouble. And normally the TSC talks to that work group and says, hey, what's your plans? What are we going to do? The biggest thing, and there was a discussion around accelerators. This put a lot of stress on the work groups because the accelerators have got organizations that are paying money and bringing people forward to create projects, and a lot of times that goes faster than we as volunteers can do. And that's in the old world where the work group and the work group chairs were sort of the same thing as project leads. That doesn't need to be the case. You need to know what's going on with those projects so you understand what's going on, and so that you can let the project leads know, hey, there's this deadline coming up, and you need to make sure you're on top of that deadline, and we can help you with that if you need help. Vice versa, you can be strict with the projects. Hey, if you don't meet this deadline, our deadline, I'm sorry, we're not going to allow you to go forward because we don't want to get dinged, or it's not our fault that you're having some trouble. So there tends to be or need to be a liaison between the project and the work group. So if you're bringing a project on, if you're sponsoring or co-sponsoring a project, you want to have someone in your group who's liaising. And it either could be from the project team who's liaising to the work group, or vice versa, someone from the work group who's in charge of making sure that that project's on track. Co-sponsoring, it may be that that project isn't making the reports to you all the time. But that liaison, that work group member who is a liaison, can bring that back to your work group. However the work group wants to do it, I know like in orders and observations, they've got a bit more formal processes around that versus some other work groups, right? Again, at the end of the day, you as co-chair and with your other co-chairs within your work group need to determine how it is you're going to manage those projects. But it's one of the things is that you have that responsibility for those projects. And so making sure that you're keeping in touch with all of the projects that your work group sponsors is important. There are 2 steps to the creation and approval of a project, right? And again, as I said earlier, any work that's done requires an active project. There's the project proposal and the project scope statement. And this is relatively new in the term of the organization. We used to just have project scope statements. The project proposal was brought in basically to allow the entire organization to understand what was going on and to provide groups an opportunity to say, hey, I'm interested in that. I'd like to be kept informed about that. So it's mandatory for new projects that are creating new specifications, and it's done in advance of the PSS. So you go to JIRA and you follow the forms. So if you go to, if I break out, and go to that link. So all of our PSSs and project proposals are done in JIRA, right? And I can create a new project proposal, right? And I give the information that I need to. So what's a good summary for it? A description, project description, and you basically follow and give all of this information. And you want to give enough information, and you may be editing over the life of the project proposal so that groups can understand what it is you're doing. And there's twofold for that. First is to let people know who might be interested, because you may not know who's interested. You may already have an idea. So, I recently am doing a postable remittance for the Da Vinci project. We kind of knew it was going to be in the payer space. So PPIE kind of figured they might be the sponsor, but we didn't know if financial management wanted to be involved, and we didn't know who else necessarily wanted to be involved. Right. So this project proposal gives everyone a chance to look at it and say, hey, I'd like to be involved with that, or I don't care. I don't want to be involved. It also allows for people to say, hey, you may not know, but there's another project in HL7 that's doing something like that, or IHE's got a project, or have you looked here? So this again gives visibility to the world for in HL7 on what your plan is, what your proposal for the project is. So again, from Jira, and I'm not going to actually create one, create, right? And that will create a project proposal. It's open for 2 weeks to review or longer, a minimum of 2 weeks to allow groups to look at it. Groups will ask questions, and again, the owner of the project proposal can be the work group, or it can be the your project team has to answer all of those questions. So it stays open until those questions are answered. And again, the TSC will point out, hey, there's still some questions here. What are you doing around that? And once those questions are answered, and once at least 2 weeks have gone by, then the project gets approved. Project proposal gets approved, and now you can move to a project scope statement. And this is where the project scope statement is going to be where there's more rigor and more detail going on. This is really at the proposal level. It's, hey, I'm interested in doing this. Here's a description of what this is. Who's with me, right? That's really where this is coming from. So then, creating a project scope statement, the same kind of thing. It was that the drop down was project proposal, or project scope statement. You also have, and we've added the ability to, once you've gotten approved project proposal, there's a button on the proposal itself which allows you to migrate it to PSS, because a lot of the information you provided in the proposal, is going to be the same in the PSS. So rather than having to type it all in again, you can do that. So we've just recently added that. Once you've gotten workgroup approval, so this is where workgroup co-chairs, right, and the projects sort of interact, right? Once, at the project proposal stage, I've more than likely, as my workgroup, I've said, yeah, I'm interested in sponsoring that or co-sponsoring, or I may have even voted and said, hey, we voted to sponsor that. Then the project scope statement in there, you'll identify who the sponsoring workgroup is. And if you've got that workgroup approval, you can immediately move it to that. Or if you got to go back to the meeting. And again, this is where the give and take between the projects and the workgroup, right, is you've got the workgroup as a co-chair, you've got to make sure you've got to provide your workgroup approval. So you need to allow for the project team to come and get that approval. And again, it's not on us as the co-chairs to make sure that it goes fast, but very often we'll find people are like, oh, I've got this project, I really want to get started. So can we do this as quick as possible? And so if you can be as helpful in doing that, but again, you may have tons of work and tons of projects, and it may take a while. And if you don't meet every week, if you meet, once a month, or you meet every second week or what have you, the project's going to have to work with you on that, right? Once you've got workgroup approval, it goes to consensus review. It's open for at least a 4-week period. Any co-sponsors will have to go in and approve. There are some subtasks. So if it's a US Realm project, then there's a US Realm Steering Committee. If it's a fire or V2, the management group gets involved. If there's terminology involved, right? So there's a number of different subtasks, a number of different approvals. And so again, this is where the project facilitator or the workgroup co-chair should be monitoring and responding, right? How I like to do it in the work groups that I'm involved, I leave that up to the project facilitator to be monitoring it. And any projects that I'm running, I take that I take an active role, and I'm shepherding my project through the various steps and working with the workgroup co-chairs to let them know what I'm doing. That might work for you guys as co-chairs. It might not, but again, there's that close symbiosis in getting the PSS approved between the project team and the workgroup co-chair. After 4 weeks of minimum, and after the subtasks have all been approved, it transitions to the TSC, and the TSC will look and make sure that all comments will be approved, and they may push back. We've got a lot of knowledgeable people on the TSC, and there's other things they're looking for, and there may be things that they know about. Hey, does this require, copyright concerns? Do we need to have an agreement in place with another organization? There's other, board things that are going on. Who knows what exactly, but the TSC will tend to have questions. And sometimes people show up to the TSC meetings to explain their PSS, but very often we handle these via e-vote, and they go through fairly quickly if it's an easy, understandable PSS. Deadlines. So we do have an HL7 calendar. So again, on the Confluence page, there's a link to HL7 calendars, right? For balloting in the cycle following the next working group meeting, the PSS must be approved and submitted to the PMO 2 weeks after the working group meeting. So if you want to ballot in September, you've got to get the PMO done. Oh, I've got it. PSS for the January 2024 cycle would have been June 2nd, 2023. That's when it needed to be done. We do have some changes to these deadlines. We're trying to make them easier. And so we've made some fixed deadlines. And again, go to the HL7 calendars and you'll see when the deadlines are. We used to be a weird esoteric formula. People will ask us, why is it so far in advance? And it's really to protect the projects, even though it doesn't seem like it. And to protect the work groups, actually, in many cases. We would have people come with their PSS and they'd have most of their content already done and they were ready for ballot. And so they were getting the PSS approved and then 2 weeks later going to ballot, right? And how do you as a work group, how do you handle that? Right. So that's why very often, that's why we've pushed these deadlines back to make the project teams realize you got to get started early. So if you want to ballot in January, right? And think about it, if you're a fire implementation guide, I want to ballot in January. Well, the actual January ballot occurs in December. So you need to have tested. So you probably want to go to the September Connectathon, which means you need to have gotten your work, started probably, and the September, Connectathon, you need to have something ready in August. And suddenly, you're pretty far back to actually make all of those deadlines. And your PSS takes 4 weeks. So you want at the minimum to start in June and, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a lot of these deadlines that they're not arbitrary, but they're there because we know you've got a lot of work to do to move your project forward. And so it's to help the work groups not have to suddenly, get stuff over the wall and go, what the heck, you want to ballot in 2 weeks? We've never seen any of this content. So that's where a lot of the TSC calendar deadlines are in places to help us as work groups. If you're doing a fire implementation guide, there's some additional requirements. If you're doing a CDA implementation guide, there may be some additional requirements they're working on. Same thing with V2. Again, for those specific products, you're going to want to work with the management groups and you need to get approval in the PSS. The fire implementation guides, they have an implementation guide proposal that needs to be created, one for every IG you're producing. It could be that your PSS is doing multiple guides. And so they've got, and there's a link on the Confluence for the process flow for the fire IG proposal and creating those, getting them approval from your work group and then taking them to FMG, fire management group. Any questions around that? So I'm going to break out and we'll go back to the essentials page. So get started with HL7 Essentials, right? And here's this new project start here. We do have the flow, right? The page. So creating the project proposal and the PSS, some specific specific steps, and then you're getting into actual balloting and this is the next piece. But what we've been talking about is so far has been here, the project proposal and the PSS and the fire IG proposal, right? And so we've got some links in the HL7 Essentials. New projects start here, right? That gives you that flow. And then on the left-hand side, you can follow each of the steps. What is it that I need to do, right? And so there's some diagrams. And again, we as the TSC are trying to ensure that this is up to date. You should be able to follow it and here's how to create various things. Here's the calendars and the fire specific dates, all those sorts of things. If you do see anything that's out of date, please, let us know by submitting a change. All right. So you've gotten the project started, right? Project teams often working. You as a work group co-chair and the work group will have some requirements on that project team for updates. Some work groups want, very often updates. Some want, once a month or once a quarter, whatever works for your work group and potentially for that project in your work group is fine, right? As long as, again, knowing as a work group co-chair that we're on the hook for that information, right? Making sure that we, make it easy for the projects to do their work, but also make sure that we're staying on top of things. Those are the important things. Sorry, I'm just silencing my phone. Once a so the project's doing its work, and then they're getting close, and they're going to want to submit, right? And they're going to want to ballot, right? That's the first step. They can't publish until they've ballot. So then we get into the balloting, and there's a lot of process around the balloting. So, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'll answer when the ballot can be done. Again, the calendars, and Lynn Laxo is in charge of our balloting, HL7 staff, and she does a good job of creating, so the calendars will have that. And the first step towards balloting is creating a notice of intent to ballot. So if I'm going to be balloting if I want to ballot in the September cycle, so that ballot's in August, then I believe it's June. I can't remember exactly when it is. Again, we'd go to the calendars. But that's where the work group needs to create the notice of intent to ballot. This is purely just a notice. It's letting Lynn know and letting the TSC know and letting people know, hey, I've got this thing that I'm intending to ballot. It's not a commitment. You know, you could get closer and closer to the ballot time and go, oh, we're just not ready. Shoot. So we intended to, but we're not ready. Vice versa, though, if you've missed the NIB deadline, and you now say, "Ooh, hey, it turns out we are ready. We didn't think we'd be ready." Now you're in trouble, right? Because there's a whole bunch of processes around the consensus pool and the ballot announcement that we have to follow. And to follow those processes, we need to know about your intent to ballot. Also, if you're going normative, if you're doing a normative specification, there's some extra rigor, and the notice of intent to ballot allows us to let ANSI know about that, right? So there's some timelines. You can go to the TSC and request an appeal for missing the deadline. Your project can, but again, that an appeal is going to get dinged on your work group. So like everything, it works really between the work group and the project team to work hand in hand to ensure that they're not missing the deadlines so that you don't have to do these appeals, right? So yeah, basically the notice of intent to ballot is going to be after the previous ballot cycle. So you're not going to be able to do it before the May ballot for September. You got to wait until that ballot cycle opens, right? And so I think, yeah, thank you, Lynn. So July 7th, if you were planning to ballot in September 2024, July 7th is when the NIB is going to be due. You can do it early. Well, you can't do it too early because Lynn doesn't have it set up. But you don't necessarily have to wait until the last day. Once you've got that notice of intent to ballot, right, then you're working on your content. The project team's working on the content. They're providing you updates. And then when it gets close to when the ballot's actually opening, then if you look at the HL7 calendars, there's a whole bunch of dates of when final content has to be done and when the QA needs to be done. And then depending upon what it is you're doing, you've got the various management groups are going to have requirements for you. So again, you need to plan in advance. So most of this stuff the project team is going to do, you as the work group have to give the approval. So they're going to want to schedule with you a 1 week or 2 week period where they can come and present, aha, here's what we're ready to ballot with. And you as the work group to do a QA review. That's the first step. Then they move on to the management group and they get the QA review there. And then it goes to the TSC. Well, not for balloting, but for the management group approves it. Those things what are you looking for when you're doing the QA of the balloting? It's really, what is this something that we as the work group are content to let go to ballot? There may be some issues that could be raised in balloting, right, at the time, but as long as it's something that we're willing to have go to ballot, right, that's what you're giving your QA for. So it's got a whole ton of errors in it and it just doesn't read well and it doesn't make sense. Those are things you could say, shoot, project team, you're not really ready for ballot yet. If there's, hey, I think that you're missing something on this profile, or I think you should have some extra checks. Those are things that could be raised in a ballot. You could probably let them go. So they've done the NIB, they've come to you, the project teams come to you, the work group, and as co-chairs to say, here's where we want to do our QA. You've done the QA, you've given them approval, and then it goes to ballot. And the project team, gets it ready, sends their information to Lynn for her to post on the ballot, and Bob's your uncle. And again, in the Confluence in Essentials page, sorry, let me go back. We've got information on balloting, right? There's a lot of information on here on after you've balloted, on when you need to reballot, or how do you handle reconciliation of comments. and things like that, right? But there's information there on that, on the ballot management, and also in the HL7 processes. There's also here on ballot announcements and HL7 ballots. So there's quite a bit of information. And then the calendar, excuse me, HL7 calendars. So once you go to the main Confluence page, on the left-hand side, there's the HL7 calendars, right? And then for any given cycle, so 2024 September ballot cycle, right? And Lynn does a great job of putting the list of things. And so, yeah, July 7th is the NIB deadline, right? Your IG proposals due to FMG by June 16th if you want to ballot in September. But again, if I'm balloting next year, so not until May, but I know I'm doing an IG, why wouldn't I get that IG proposal done sooner? So as work groups, right, we want to make sure our projects know that these deadlines are the latest dates, and really, if you can do it earlier rather than later, that's good. Right, here's the appeal deadline if you happen to miss the NIBs, right? But you only go so far. If it's August and you said, hey, I think I can ballot now, you're way too late. So that's not going to happen. Excuse me. July. So for, again, this is for September, and every one of our cycles has this calendar, but here's where the work group approves your fire IG or any of your content, right? From July 30th to August 9th, right? Any changes that they're going to make, right, can be up until August 9th. Then you make your final content deadline and you're done. If you need an appeal for that, we've always got appeals because there are sometimes projects, you know, for whatever reason need appeals. But again, note that gets dinged on your work group health. So you want to work with your projects so that they're coming early and they're helping you look good and you're helping them look good. And then the ballot opens August 16th to September 16th, right? That's where all of, again, that PSS deadline, why is that so early? Well, you go back in time from when you want it. If I want to ballot in 2024 September, right? I got to, you know, by June at the very latest, I need to know that I've got what it is I'm balloting. And so I have to have my PSS approved. Like you just back it up. And that's why it's so far in advance. We don't allow you just to create a project and immediately create your content and immediately ballot. There's requirements for people to see things. So it's balloting, it's out there, right? Balloting closes September 16th, right? Stuff happens, and then we have a working group meeting, and people are going to want to move on from the ballot and reconcile things and do things and eventually get their material published, right? So there are deadlines, there are processes after that occur around, you know, there's no deadlines on that because that just happens as, you know, if I've got 150 comments or I've got 30 comments, there's no deadlines for that. But after the balloting finishes, that project's going to want to publish their material, and that's what we work on. And again, there's one of our work group health metrics is how many things that you've balloted have got published, right? We don't want them to ballot and then just sit there doing nothing, right? So you want to be working with your project teams on what's your plans for getting all of those comments reconciled and moving forward with publishing. All right, let me go back. All of these deadlines and all of these things that we do with the ballot pool and the notification of intent is because we are an ANSI accredited organization. And one of the three basic principles of ANSI are openness. Anyone can join in the process and vote on standards. Consensus, right? That you've gotten consensus from a bunch of groups. It's not just one person doing something, not listening to anyone. And balance, that you've sought input from a number of different stakeholder groups, right? And so to get accreditation, we apply and we're audited every 5 years to ensure that our processes adhere to ANSI requirements. And again, those work group health metrics and working with your projects, all of that is to ensure that we're meeting these ANSI requirements. So a lot of those administrative processes are all around that, ensuring that attendance is documented in your work group meetings, ensuring that any votes on decisions on your JIRA issue is documented, not just in the JIRA issue itself, but in your minutes as well, right? A lot of things. Again, what does ANSI do when they come and audit? They look at the minutes of our work group meetings, of our various work groups meetings, not just the WGMs, and they look at are we following our processes, right? So we talked about the notice of intent to ballot, ensure that there's ANSI compliance, right? If you're going for normative, that's where the essential requirements takes place. The GOM talks about standards for trial use and informative, right? And you're wanting to, these last 3 points is really, I think, where we as the work group chairs, that's where our responsibility really comes in at that level. ensuring the integrity of the standard, recognizing contributions of all reviewers, striving to achieve consensus, right? You as a work group co-chair, and I know Virginia in the next talk about that we've got, the next presentation is going to talk a lot about how do we as chairs achieve that. That's what we're sort of striving for, is ensuring that people who want to participate in our projects, who want to participate in the ballot, that their voices are heard and that they have the ability to do so, and that the standard moves forward and isn't just that sort of openness and the balance, the consensus, right? It's not just one person driving the standard, right? So that's where we as co-chairs, that's where our duties come into play. We have two different kinds of levels, and we have different rules, and I've talked about that a lot. We have the normative. That's where something is going to normative. We're going to make it an ANSI standard, an ANS, an American National Standard. We have to adhere to ANSI's essential requirements and our own essential requirements. If it's standard for trial use, which so many of our standards these days are, or informative, then you just need to adhere to the governance operations manual. Those used to be one, but we've split them out because all ANSI cared about is what we're doing around the normative side. If you have any questions around the ballot processes, Lynn Laxo is a fantastic person to ask. She's got all the answers. And if she doesn't, she makes them up. No, I'm just teasing. No, she's got the answers. If it's related to ANSI, Karen Van Hentrick, our executive director, she can answer the questions. She deals a lot with ANSI as well. Virginia, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, since you called me out, I want to call out John Hayden. So if anyone missed the first session, John Hayden covered in depth how to do facilitation and how to build consensus within your group. So I would encourage you to go back and listen to that if you missed it.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Lynn.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out two things. In terms of voting, there is a webinar. Is it this week? Next week? It's next week on how to use JIRA for voting. Excuse me. And then also to let you know that I have taken over the official ANSI role. So yeah, balloting and ANSI stuff is both me now.
All right, don't go to Karen. Everyone go to Lynn. Thanks, Lynn. I didn't know that. All right. So ballot, and Lynn just talked about it. There is going to be on how to vote. So this will probably, a lot of this will be on how to sign up. But many of us know how to do that. But there's, the ballot desktop is where we sign up. All of our comments, except for reaffirmations and withdrawals, are managed in JIRA. So you need to manage your comments in JIRA, and there's a page, on the JIRA ballot process. Many of you may remember spreadsheets. That's how we used to submit our comments. They're no longer supported. Submitters can, in big organizations might still use the spreadsheet for their, to import their comments or to gather their comments, but it's up to the submitters to import their comments. It's not up to the project team, and it's no longer up to the work group co-chairs to get that in. Again, if we offer to help an organization or someone who's gone and created the spreadsheet, that's on us. But we were trying to push everyone to raising their issues via JIRA. And so that's why it's no longer the responsibility of the work group co-chairs like it had been in the past to help import those. It's now on the onus of the submitter. And then ballot reconciliation is also managed in JIRA. There's a link to specification feedback. So we use JIRA. There are JIRA projects available for fire, for V2, for CDA, and others, right? Dams, functional profiles. And basically those artifacts have to be created before the ballot opens. How that gets done, it depends on the management family. Like if you're doing a fire IG, there's a specific file that gets created and you can import that. And again, configuring the specification feedback, that's out of scope of this presentation. But that's how things get into, and that's how we as voters would go and choose the specification that we're choosing, is by picking the product that is going to be listed in the JIRA. Here's the ballot desktop for any given cycle, right? The list cycles are listed. It'll list all of the things that are being balloted on. Again, the way the consensus groups, and this is getting into a little bit about balloting, which there is a webinar coming up. You choose the groups you're participating in, and then that's going to be listed here, and then you can make votes. As co-chairs, where we really care is the tally tab. That's the one that is important to us. right? And in that tab, right, we're going to have a list of all of the projects that balloted. We'll be looking for the ones that we care about, right? And then it lists, you know, as balloting is occurring and once balloting finishes, right, all of the different votes. And there's going to be, you know, a summary of did you get enough votes depending on the level that you had? Did you get enough votes to achieve quorum? And then out of that quorum, did you get enough votes to pass? Is there an HL7 site? I'm looking at what Mark says. How do you create pages, flowchart, different decisions? Yeah, so that's going to be, I'm not going to cover a lot of those questions here around that reconciliation process. There is, I will say there is a project that's going on in HL7 to create dashboards in Jira, and those dashboards will help you. There's project dashboards, workgroup dashboards, and accelerated dashboards. The project dashboard will help see all of the issues that were raised, both either in a specific ballot or in general, so it'll allow you to keep track of them. And then see the negative issues if you want, or the negative ballots. There is not a different flow for informative versus STU versus normative. There's just different rigor, right? So if I've got a normative, then there's a quorum and a set of and an affirmative, right? So there's a specific quorum I need to achieve for it to have passed the ballot, and then I need a specific approval rating. Informative, and this is on the tally tab, it'll show you there's no quorum requirement, but you need to have a specific set of affirmatives. Determining which of the decisions to make on the dispositions. I mean, again, that's going to be out of scope of this webinar. There are pages in the HL7 Essentials around what the different persuasive, not persuasive means. So you need to talk to those. Do you need to get negative issues withdrawn? Well, it depends, right? If it's a normative, yes. If it's not normative, then you need at least to get as many withdrawn as will get you your approval rating. So I have, as an example, CDA structure definition was an informative ballot. I'm stuck because I want to publish it and I'm done, but I'm waiting for people to withdraw enough negatives. I need 6 people to withdraw their negatives to get the appropriate approval rating, and that's for informative. Again, normative, there's way more rigor involved. You need to get everyone to withdraw all their negatives to allow you to go forward. And that's talked about in the GOM and or the essential requirements. Do all co-chairs get access to the ballot desktop? Everyone gets access to the ballot desktop and you can view the tally. What you can and cannot do is if you are a co-chair. If you are a co-chair, then you get access to some extra features. So that's submitting the reconciliation spreadsheet, sending out a request to voters to withdraw. Those things come to that is what co-chairs get. But even if I'm not, so let me break out and look at the ballot desktop. So the easiest way, well, the way I get to it. Log out. Resources, so in the menu, resources balloting, right, and go to the ballot desktop. Of course, if you want to participate, right, you got to log in. So I'm going to log in as my other self. Let's not ask why I have 2 selves. Something's wrong with my. Okay, I'm going to go in as my main person. Apologies. I hadn't planned on doing that.
Which person are you now, Jean?
I'm the, yeah. There we go. Now I'm the real person. Ballot desktop. So again, this is for the upcoming cycle. I mean, I can't join anything, but if I wanted to join, and then there's a tally page, which allows you, again, I've been a co-chair for a long time, so I don't remember. Lynn, I'll ask that question to you. The tally, does anyone, or do you have to be a co-chair to get access to the tally page? I thought anyone could, because you get to see.
I think it's in Confluence now.
Voting members can see the ballot tally on the ballot desktop.
Right.
Anyone can go into JIRA and see a snapshot of the
Sure.
tally there also on the vote, on the ballot record.
Right. But if you have the ability to vote, then you have the ability to get into the desktop and therefore see the tally. Okay, so yeah, sure. If you're not a voting member, then you're right, you don't get access. Anyway, from the ballot, you pick, as co-chairs, right? This is the project that I'm interested in, right? And now I have the ability to upload. This isn't the project I'm interested in. This is in 2024. But if it were one, I'd have the ability to upload the reconciliation package, contact voters. So you have a number of things as a co-chair that you are able to do. And so your project team members may not be able to do that because they're not co-chairs. So again, here's another case where as co-chairs, we need to work with the project teams to help them with the ballot process. People were talking about the fact that in JIRA you can go and there's a ballot site that actually will list that's the actual ballot content, sorry, will list the ballot record for the projects, and there you can see a snapshot of votes as well, because again, all of our voting takes place in JIRA. So there's a linkage between this page, the ballot desktop, and what's going on in JIRA. Lynn's been dropping a bunch of links around ballot specification reconciling, which again, I think is projects can be project specific and or work group specific, where on how to help things. So you bring up your project, you'll have some green. Let me drop out again. Let's go to one. Let's go back. Let's go to one that I'm doing. So the January ballot cycle. The tally page for January. So we talked about quorum, so a little bit about what you need from a voting perspective. So here's the requirements that are needed, and green means you've achieved it for whatever that means. So here's my right. So this is the one that I'm working on right now that I was talking about. And so I've got the quorum. Well, it's informative, so there's no quorum level. And for informative, I need 60% approval. I don't have that yet. I need some of these people who are negative to withdraw their votes so that I can get approval. I need 18 and I've got 11. So I need people to fix this. I need them to go and retrieve their vote, to withdraw their votes, right? So I, as a project member, am watching this because I want to be able to ballot, but I need a structured docs co-chair to help me potentially with this if I didn't have ability to do things on this page. So what do I need? I need some of these people who voted negative to withdraw, right? So I have the ability to request withdraw. So again, there's a lot in the HL7 Essentials page, and here there's talks about what this needs to do and help. And you can always reach out to Lynn in case you're unsure about what you need to do for your project, or any of us on the TSC. Yep, and I'm looking at what emits is, right? So in green, right? If it's not in green, if your quorum's not in green or your approval's not in green, it'll tell you down here what you need, and it's listing, and again, this is an informative, so there's no quorum requirement. But what do I need? I need 60% approval, which means I need to have at least 18 votes affirmative, and I've only got 11, so I need 7 people to move over. We could go back to a different one. Let's do this one, which is STU, right? So again, for STU ballots, no quorum requirement, but 60% approval. So here's one where I'm ready to go, even though there's still some negatives. If you're normative, right, you need to have a majority quorum, you need to have 75% approval, and that means you've passed the ballot. But before you can publish, you have to get all of your negatives withdrawn. They all have to be handled, right? And again, the GOM and the essential requirements gives you all of that information. If a line is listed in red, they're a negative voter, they've not withdrawn their vote, right? And they haven't been notified of the status. You haven't let them know that they need to withdraw. If it's yellow, that means they have withdrawn, but they just haven't been notified. Yellows are okay. When the line isn't completely red, so if you go back to the ballot desktop, right, that means these people have been informed, but they still haven't withdrawn their, so I'm waiting and waiting for them to come and, well, it hasn't been that long to withdraw. So that gives you some of the color coordination, and that talks about over here. Here in the slide, we've got what does the comment, ballot. So this goes back to some of Mark's questions, the comment dispositions. What does this mean? Right? Persuasive, not persuasive, with mod, persuasive, but it would not necessarily what was proposed. Not related. We don't. This isn't related to this ballot or considered for future use. We're going to do in the forward. Calculating quorum. We've talked about that. For normative ballots, you're having to resolve all the negative comments, and you have to request withdrawal of all the negatives. And someone may end up either not agreeing with your resolution, or they just disappear and they're unable to contact. And so they're unable to withdraw their negative. So we have a recirculation ballot. Basically allows us to go back to the consensus pool for our ballot and say, hey, here's our dispositions. And here we're unable to get these commenters who voted negative to withdraw their comment. So you basically can override their negative, right? It's a normative ballot. It's a recirculation ballot. And it's basically to let the consensus group know, hey, there's these negatives that are unresolved. They have the ability to change their response if they feel, maybe they didn't understand. And now that unresolved negative is important. And no, I'm not going to allow. Or you can, if everyone votes negative, that allows you to override that negative. So again, a lot of times this gets used in the past for where balloters just disappear, right? They balloted, this was balloted 6 months ago, and now they've, through some change in circumstances, they're just not around to withdraw. And no matter what you do to try and contact them, you can't. In a very few rare cases have we had to do it where the submitter does not agree with the disposition of the comment and refuses to withdraw their negative. In those cases, that's what the recirculation do, is to override that. And again, we're trying to achieve consensus. So the hope is that you wouldn't do that circumstance wouldn't come up that often, but every now and then it does. All right. Retirement on a recirculation, does it have to be 100%? Yes. Yeah, you have to get approval from everybody. And in normal cases, right? In the case where
no, that's not true.
It's
sorry.
normative,
With a
isn't it?
recirculation, it simply allows the entire ballot pool to specifically review those outstanding negative comments. And if there is, and if that recirculation passes, then the negative comments are considered closed. They were specifically to be reconsidered, and if that recirculation ballot passes, then it can proceed.
So it just has to pass. It doesn't have to be 100%.
It does not have to be 100%.
Okay, that's good to know. The ones I've done have been where the person's not around, so I've always had 100%. So, and what is passing for a recirculation ballot? It's a normative, so it's 75% approval. And majority quorum. So of the consensus group, you've had a majority of people who have voted. Thank you, Lynn. Retirement withdrawal of a specification. A lot of times, co-chairs, we're going to find out about our specifications. They've been, their time has come up, right? So we have within HL7, we have 3 different states. We have an active, so it's actively being worked on. And it's being balloted and published, and more work's going on. So that's an active specification. We have a stable state where this is a valid specification. It's available for use. We intend people to use it, but it's at a point in its life cycle where there's not a lot of change that's going to be happening to it. It's stable. It's, it's good. It's as good as we're going to get it. Obviously, we can still make some changes, but that's not the intent. And then there's retired, where this is a standard. It may be useful, but it's not one that we've touched. We don't have the ability. We don't have the requirements to make any changes. It may have been superseded by something else, or it's just something we don't intend people to implement. They can. It's still available on the HL7 website, but a retired specification is something where it's like, yeah, we just, we're not going to be touching this. You can raise some issues, but we don't guarantee we're going to deal with them because we've retired, right? Again, it's either something that the people who created it are no longer around. We don't have the subject matter experts for this, or we've moved on to a different standard, and that's the standard we want people to implement, right? So those are the states. And so at any point in time, you may need to retire or withdraw a specification. For normative specifications, those that we've registered with ANSI, they refer to the process as withdrawing. So there is a process established to retire and withdraw a standard. And they're still available and you can bring them up. They're kind of hidden on the product grid. You have to use the include retired standards filter and that brings them back, but they're still there and people can download them. So it's not in the far past, it used to be we would get rid of standards and you just weren't available anymore. You always have the ability to find the standard. It's just if it's retired, that's a mark from the work group and from HL7. This is probably not one you should implement because there's something, either it's behind the times or there's something that has superseded it. There is in the HL7 Essentials, it talks about withdrawal and the process and what you need to do. And it really depends upon whether something was normative, STU, or informative, whether it's been published or not, whether it's been validated or not, on what the exact process you need to do to withdraw a standard. And so please, on the HL7 Essentials under withdraw, you can go there and see what needs to be done. The life cycle, the default life cycle for normative standards is 5 years. After that 5 years, you need to either reaffirm, so say, yeah, this is still valid, we're still working on it, it's still something that needs to be registered as normative. You need to retire or withdraw it, like we just talked about, or you could extend it for another 5 years. No, you could extend it, not for another, that's reaffirming for another 5 years. You can extend it if you need some extra time. It's frowned upon. Normally you should be getting notified about these specifications and doing something in advance, but stuff happens. And so we have the ability to request an extension from ANSI. It may be that you're intending to withdraw this spec because you're going to have a new version of it and it's taking a little longer. And so you just need a couple more months to get that new version out the door to take over this existing, the current normative specification. Yes, the links to the slides are available. They were published in the chat earlier, and they'll be sent out to people afterwards. For STU, when you're creating the STU, the default life is 2. You might request less. And what do you have when that life cycle is in? You can either extend it for another X number of years, or you can retire that STU specification. And for informative, the default life is 5 years. And again, you can extend or retire. STU specifications that you want to extend beyond 5 years, right? The intent of an STU specification is you're going to move it up to normative or potentially replace it. So you have after 5 years, you have to request the TSC if you want to extend it more than that. And the TSC frowns on that because the whole point is that's being built, that trial use specification is being built, and you should know either I've got a new version of it or you're going normative with it. Process to extend, right? The work group should discuss and make a decision, sorry. If it's normative, then there's an ANSI extension and reaffirmation ballot that's required, right? To make sure people are okay with you extending it. If it's STU or informative, it's just an extension request to the TSC.
And don't forget, you'll need a justification.
You will need a justification for why you're extending, yes. Failure to do one of these means the specification gets retired and also withdrawn from ANSI if normative. And we kind of get dinged a little bit, don't we, Lynn? If we let things just withdraw on their own without doing something.
Very much so.
So even though you'd think, oh, that normative thing, and we're just going to withdraw, well, we'll just let it withdraw. And I'm sure Lynn has heard me say, oh, just let that be withdrawn. Yeah, sure, but we get dinged for doing that because there's a process.
Well, if you don't do it, we'll do it. We'll administratively
We'll
start a withdrawal ballot. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So here's the grid, and this is found on the HL7 Essentials page. Right. Again, it depends on the ballot level and whether something was published or not on exactly what do you need to do. So we won't go too much into that. The withdrawal ballot process, right? It's comment only ballot. It's just to let the world know, hey, we're planning on withdrawing this. And then you're going to get back and, votes on it. And, there's a number of withdrawal ballots right now, as a matter of fact. And basically the work group has to consider the feedback to determine whether, hey, are we actually going to withdraw this? Or are we going to reaffirm? So at the end of your withdrawal ballot, you may conduct a reaffirmation ballot to say, actually, it turns out people came out of the woodwork and we're going to reaffirm this. Or you're going to send a request to the TSC to say, yeah, we're done. We did our withdrawal ballot. Please, please withdraw the standard. Linda's talking about, I see the comment, currently in the GOM, it says that you need to make a request to the executive committee to get an STU more than 5 years, but that's being changed. There's a GOM request to make it just be the TSC. There is, along with the Project Health, there's a PBS metric report, and it's available on the website under your work groups. And it's provided to allow work groups to track the status of their ballots as well as their projects. But it's really good at seeing what active ballots you've got, what things are non-advancing. So that's where I've got a ballot, and it's been a long time and it hasn't either been published or moved on to another version. Idle ballots, expired STUs. I don't know why I didn't use this page before. I was always asking how do I find this information? And then I went to the page and I'm like, oh, it's all here. And so you've got, the dashboard and plus links to spreadsheets or other reports that show you what are your active ballots, what are your active STUs, what are your expiring STUs. And that allows you as a work group co-chair to keep on top of things, right? Which is, again, from the administrative side of things, that's all what it's about, is keeping on top of things. Zoom best practices. I've got just a few more slides left. I know John Hayden went into a bunch of things on getting consensus. This helps. And so display participant full names, ask them to indicate their organizations, so you know where they are for. We used to, when we first moved to Zoom, get a lot of Zoom bombing. We still do. So make sure that no Zoom URLs are publicly available. Change any links that have been compromised. It is not fun when someone gets on and spams your Zoom call. It tends to be a lot of profanity, or it just wrecks your call and you got to stop it. There is a Confluence page on best practices for co-chairs. That's I haven't been in lately. Have seen too many Zoom bombs. Again, when during COVID, we saw a lot of those because people just had time on their hands. And that's what we're trying to do, is make it a nice, safe place for people. There is a code of ethics at HL7. We also have a code of conduct. There's a statement on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we did have a webinar around diversity, and I know Dan and I are really hoping to foster more of those kinds of webinars. And again, when you're, as a co-chair, when you're running your work groups and you're running your calls, right, you want to keep these in mind. And I know many of us on our agendas, we now have a link or a statement around the code of ethics and conduct, and also, maybe about some other things. If you participate in accelerator calls, they've got the non-compete and things like that. Elliot asks, is there a policy around recording calls? Calls can be recorded if you want, but I tend not, the work groups I'm on, we tend not to record our calls. Sometimes we do if it's important to capture. You do have to respect that some people don't want to be recorded for whatever reason. And so we do have, I'm not sure if we have a page. I think in the TSC we discussed this and came up with not necessarily a policy, but a recommendation that you let people know you're going to record. And if people have a problem with it, they can either contact you via chat because they may not want to say what their problem is. And you be cognizant of that maybe you're not able to record, or you need to provide them the ability to leave. And Zoom has that already, where you get told something's about to be recorded and you can leave. John, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just very briefly. And thanks, Virginia, for calling out the facilitation presentation. My 2 cents, just to add that, and I think this is a good place to add it, is as co-chairs, when you're running your room, running the meeting, there's always this emphasis on the material and the content and everything. But every once in a while, it's important that you listen and read your room. I'm going to call it read the room. In other words, get a sense of who's new, who's not new, who's maybe off track, who's not on track, and just try to kind of pull that together. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
No, thanks, John. No, that's entirely true. I think that's sort of the once you get around all this administrative stuff around projects and balloting and all that, I mean, that's at the end of the day, our role as co-chairs is to ensure the smooth running the room. I like that, reading the room and running the room, right? And making sure people have a voice and can be heard, and that you don't have too much being squashed or anything like that. So, and the code of conduct talks a lot about that as well. All right, I've got a slide. So if you want to see around the HL7 staff, right over about HL7 and then HL7 staff, and you can see all their shining faces, and a lot of them, all of them, I shouldn't say a lot of them, all of them are more than willing to help us. I mean, if any of you have been at working group meetings, you know that a lot of them sit at the table and they're all very helpful and very, very great to work with. I think we are blessed with a great staff who are very helpful in helping us do what we want to do. All right, any questions? We're getting at the end of the time. There's just a couple minutes left. If you do have any questions, here's my email address. I do not have a problem with you guys emailing me and asking some questions. It may take a while. I'm busy, as we all are. You can contact, if you know people on the TSC, please don't hesitate to contact them. If you're at a working group meeting and you've got questions for me, please don't hesitate to stop me in the hallway and talk to me. Very often, I'm more than willing to talk to people. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I got to go somewhere. So thanks, but no thanks. But I'm more than willing to meet all of you again, but talk to your TSC reps or anyone that you know. For this specific webinar, if there are any questions, you can send them to me and I will try and get you answers. If there's something that I was confusing or something that I didn't give a good explanation for, or if I need to point you to proper pages, I can do that. Again, take a look at the HL7 Essentials page, make comments around things that are unclear. We're all here to try and make all of our work smoothly, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean.